Today, we are tackling a big one, Henry Kissinger's diplomacy. It came out in 1994, and honestly, it's way more than just a history book.
No, absolutely. It's Kissinger's grand sweep, his analysis of, well, how nations juggle power, their principles, and, the search for peace over centuries.
So our mission today is really to unpack the core ideas, especially that constant push and pull he identifies between idealism and realpolitik. That comes up again and again.
It really does.
We want to give you a quicker way to grasp these big concepts that have shaped the world order. So let's get into it.
Sounds good. Diplomacy is, well, it's quite a synthesis. It really pushes you to think about those fundamental questions. How do states interact?
Right.
And he traces the evolution, from the balance of power systems through to things like collective security. He looks at different national approaches, especially the U.S.
And it's all about choices, isn't it? History as a series of decisions with consequences.
Exactly. Choices with implications that just ripple through time. It's fascinating how he frames it.
Okay, so where does Kissinger kick off this historical journey? He goes right back to the balance of power idea. What did that actually mean back then? How did it work?
Well, he points to examples like ancient Greece, Renaissance Italy, but crucially, the European system after the Peace of Westphalia in 1648.
Okay.
The key thing, as Kissinger lays it out, was taking the simple fact that there were multiple states, roughly equal in power, and turning that into a principle for world order.
Oh, so it wasn't just accidental, it became deliberate strategy.
Exactly. And intellectually, this fit with Enlightenment ideas is belief that the universe, even politics, kind of worked on these rational balancing mechanisms.
It's a big shift. More secular, more calculated, maybe.
Very much so. A calculated form of statecraft.
And who's the poster child for this early European approach?
Yeah.
Kissinger really focuses on Cardinal Richelieu. What was so revolutionary about his raison d'etat?
Kissinger really digs into Richelieu. He argues Richelieu didn't just, win some wars. He basically invented modern statecraft.
Wow.
His idea of raison d'etat, basically national interest trumps everything else, even shared religion or family ties. That was radical stuff.
So it's not about personal morals anymore.
Precisely. Kissinger shows it wasn't just pragmatic, it was like a philosophical shift. Diplomacy moved away from personal morality towards this cold, calculated almost, he says, mathematical precision in balancing power.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Richelieu, a Catholic cardinal, sided with Protestant princes against the Catholic Habsburgs. Why? Because he saw the Habsburgs getting too powerful as a direct threat to France. That's raison d'etat in action.
Okay, so Richelieu is the pragmatic European model. Then Kissinger really contrasts that with America's entry onto the world stage. He sees it as completely different, right?
Oh, completely. Kissinger notes how American leaders often just assume their values are universal, and they don't always realize how revolutionary or even unsettling these can seem elsewhere.
Like what specifically?
Like the idea that ethical principles should apply to nations just like they do to people. That was a direct rejection of that European tradition, which kind of expected harmony to emerge from competing selfish interests.
So America thought states should be judged by the same moral code as individuals.
Exactly. A totally different starting point.
And Woodrow Wilson is central to this American approach, isn't he? His vision seems transformative in Kissinger's telling.
Absolutely. Kissinger contrasts him with someone like Theodore Roosevelt, who he saw as a sophisticated analyst of the balance of power, seeing America's role as national interest.
But Wilson was different.
For Wilson, Kissinger says the justification was messianic. America wasn't just playing the game, it had this obligation to spread its principles throughout the world.
Wow, that's a big claim.
Huge. Wilson argued peace depended on democracy spreading, that states needed the same ethical standards as people, and that the national interest was adhering to universal law.
But Kissinger doesn't just praise this, right? He points out the problems, the paradoxes, especially with the League of Nations.
He does. Wilson saw the League as this universal association to guarantee security, enforce peace, fix problems. A noble goal.
Right.
But, Kissinger argues, the American public just wasn't ready for that level of military commitment, defending the Versailles Treaty, or what felt like steps towards world government.
And the core idea of collective security itself.
Kissinger sees a fundamental flaw there. The idea that all nations would see every threat the same way and take the same risks to stop it. He says flatly it had never actually occurred and was not destined to occur.
So this mix of American ideals and the realities of power politics created a kind of long-term tension.
Exactly. Decades of American ambivalence, as Kissinger puts it, trying to square that circle.
Okay, we've got the European balance with Richelieu, America's Idealism with Wilson. But Kissinger also spends a lot of time on Russia. He calls it a special case. Why? What made Russia so different in his view?
Well, for starters, Russia was late to the European diplomatic game. And it was just massive, an empire out of scale, bordering Europe, Asia, the Muslim world, 3 different spheres.
Not really a nation-state in the way France or Britain was.
Not in that European sense, no. It was always changing shape through conquest, absorbing, as Kissinger says, restive non-Russian ethnic groups.
And that had consequences for its outlook.
Definitely. It led to this need for huge armies and this strange blend he identifies, obsessive insecurity mixed with a kind of proselytizing zeal.
A messianic streak again.
Yeah. Russian leaders often framed expansion as this messianic vocation, rarely showing a sense of limits. Kissinger calls it a cause looking for opportunity.
So how does this unique Russian player interact with that European balance of power? Especially when someone like Bismarck arrives on the scene, the master of realpolitik.
Bismarck is a huge figure in Kissinger's narrative, a true master navigator of this complex European chessboard.
How so?
Well, he saw Austria, for example, as blocking Prussia's ambitions. He famously said, Germany is too small for the 2 of us. So he kicked Austria out of German affairs.
And France.
He shattered French illusions, those Richelieuan illusions, Kissinger calls them, through 3 carefully orchestrated wars. The key point is that the united Germany Bismarck created got its legitimacy from Prussian power, not really from national self-determination principles.
But wasn't Bismarck also known for restraint after his victories?
Absolutely. Kissinger emphasizes this. He was moderate in concluding his wars as he had been ruthless in preparing them. For about 2 decades after unification, Bismarck ran this very prudent, stabilizing foreign policy, maneuvering alliances to keep the peace in Europe.
Sounds like a success then.
In the short term, yes. But Kissinger argues Bismarck's very success kind of mortgaged the future.
How?
Well, taking Alsace-Lorraine from France created this deep, irreconcilable French antagonism. And Germany itself went from being seen as a potential victim to being the dominant, potentially threatening power. That made alliances against Germany almost inevitable down the line.
It's that classic problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
Solving one problem creates another. Short-term gain, long-term instability.
Exactly. And as you said, that carefully balanced European system started to really creak under the strain.
So where did Great Britain fit in? They were traditionally the balancer, right? How did they respond as things got more fragile?
Britain's traditional role was exactly that, the balancer of the European equilibrium. Their famous splendid isolation policy came from their strength, their island position, and this conviction they had more to lose than gain from permanent alliances on the continent.
Their main interest was just preventing any one power from dominating Europe.
Pretty much. No territorial ambitions there, just keeping the balance. And Kissinger notes this was supported by their political system where public opinion actually mattered quite a bit.
But splendid isolation didn't hold forever, did it? How does Kissinger describe that slide towards World War I? He calls it a doomsday machine.
Yeah, that's a stark phrase. He argues that by the early 20th century, the old concert of Europe, that informal system where the big powers consulted to manage crises, which had mostly kept the peace for a century, it had basically ceased to exist.
For no safety net left.
Essentially, yes. The great powers, as he puts it, threw themselves with blind frivolity into a bipolar struggle. Things hardened into 2 opposing blocs, kind of foreshadowing the Cold War.
And military planning made it worse.
Hugely. Military chiefs came up with these rigid mobilization plans that just drastically compressed the time available for decision-making.
Like a chain reaction.
Exactly. He points to the Franco-Russian Military Pact of 1894. It basically meant if one major power mobilized, it triggered everyone else. Start the doomsday machinery for all of them, as he says.
Britain's role in this.
Kissinger is quite critical here. He suggests Britain, being somewhat detached, was maybe the country in the best position to arrest this chain of events, but it hesitated. He speculates that if Britain had made its intentions clear, unambiguously supporting France and Russia, it might have saved humanity from that terrible cataclysm.
Hindsight is always 20/20, but it's a sobering thought. So World War I happens, the old order is shattered. How does Kissinger see the peace that followed, the Treaty of Versailles, actually sowing the seeds for the next conflict?
Well, look at France. They were on the winning side, but the cost was immense. Kissinger quotes Marshal Foch's famous line about Versailles. This is not peace, it is an armistice for 20 years. And Kissinger points out key weaknesses. America didn't stick around to enforce the peace. Britain went back to avoiding continental commitments. That left France feeling very vulnerable, especially next to a potentially resurgent Germany.
And in Germany.
Germany, under leaders like Stresemann, cleverly played the game, using a fulfillment policy to gradually chip away at the treaty's restrictions. But that core problem, how to have security for France and equality for Germany, Kissinger says it remained unresolved.
That unresolved tension just festered.
Precisely, setting the stage for World War II and then, of course, the Cold War that followed.
So let's talk about the U.S. approach to that next global challenge. How did figures like FDR and Truman navigate this, according to Kissinger?
Well, FDR faced the challenge of taking a very isolationist American public into a war that many felt wasn't their fight. Kissinger says FDR framed it not so much about restoring the European balance of power, but more about removing Hitler as this obstacle to a future cooperative world order based on harmony.
Is that where the four policemen idea comes in?
Exactly. FDR envisioned the US, UK, Soviet Union, and China acting as global policemen to keep the peace. Now, Kissinger points out a flaw. What happens if one of the policemen decides not to cooperate or becomes the problem?
Which brings us to Truman.
Right. Truman inherits the presidency, and Kissinger notes he had much less emotional commitment to Allied unity than FDR. He was already wary of the Soviets.
He saw parallels between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union.
Yeah, Kissinger says Truman viewed them as morally equivalent dictatorships. So when they meet at Potsdam after Germany's defeat, you have Truman and the Western Allies on one side, and Stalin, who Kissinger calls the supreme realist, applying classic old-world realpolitik on the other.
Leading to
A dialogue of the deaf, Kissinger calls it. They just talked past each other on issues like reparations, the future of Eastern Europe. The foundations of the Cold War were being laid right there.
Okay, so given this emerging conflict, what was the big U.S. strategy for the Cold War? Containment, right? How did Kissinger analyze that?
Containment is key. It really comes from George Kennan's analysis, the famous long telegram, and the X article.
But what was Kennan's diagnosis?
He argued Soviet behavior stemmed from this deep instinctive fear of the outside world, which was then justified by communist ideology.
And the prescription?
Kennan prescribed containment, a long-term, patient but firm and vigilant containment of Russian expansive tendencies.
What did that mean in practice for the U.S.?
It meant, as Kissinger highlights, America taking on this huge task of combating Soviet pressures for the indefinite future all around a vast periphery. He calls it a stern and at the same time so reactive role, a massive demanding commitment.
And this new strategy faced tests almost immediately. Korea, for example, and then those twin crises in '56, Suez and Hungary. What does Kissinger draw from those events about containment's limits and that tension between American ideals and realpolitik?
Korea was a big one. Kissinger argues the U.S. intervention wasn't really about Korea itself as a vital strategic interest.
What was it about then?
It was about demonstrating that aggression wouldn't go unpunished, making containment credible, but it became this limited war for which it had no doctrine.
And it exposed a flaw in containment.
Yes, the assumption that challenges would always be clear-cut, unambiguous, and that the Soviets or their allies would just sort of wait passively while containment worked. Korea showed it wasn't that simple.
And Suez and Hungary in '56.
Those really highlighted the dilemmas. In Suez, the U.S. actually sided against its allies, Britain and France, because of its anti-colonial principles.
Did that help U.S. standing?
Kissinger says, while it maybe fixed a problem in relations with newly independent nations, ironically, it didn't really boost U.S. standing with the non-aligned world, because Nasser, Egypt's leader, skillfully played the superpowers against each other and came out looking strong.
In Hungary, that was simultaneous.
In Hungary, the Soviets crushed an uprising. America condemned it forcefully, but ultimately Kissinger says it acquiesced to realpolitik. They weren't going to risk war, potentially nuclear war, to intervene.
A different calculation there.
A very different calculation. Kissinger argues this moment established a key fact. The Soviets were willing to risk more to keep control of Eastern Europe than the U.S. was to liberate it. Principle hit the wall of geopolitical reality.
Moving forward, the Vietnam War looms large in Kissinger's analysis. He sees it as a real crisis point for American foreign policy. How did it challenge the whole U.S. approach?
Kissinger is quite critical of the Vietnam involvement. He argues the U.S. basically lost track of that core Richelieu principle. The means have to be proportionate to the ends. The thing that is to be supported and the force that is to support it should stand in geometrical proportion to each other.
He questions the strategic rationale.
He asks why the U.S. identified its vital security with South Vietnam, especially after it had essentially accepted the communist takeover of China, a much larger country.
And the way the war was fought.
He points out the difficulty. America was trying to do two huge things at once: fight a guerrilla war against a very determined enemy supplied from the north, and try to build a stable democracy in a society with no real tradition of it. It was, he says, an intractable challenge.
So this experience, this trauma, leads directly to the shift under Nixon, where Kissinger himself was, of course, central. How did they frame this change?
The goal under Nixon became achieving an honorable peace in Vietnam, but more fundamentally shifting U.S. foreign policy, so it was explicitly geared to an analysis of the national interest.
Moving away from just applying legal or moral principles.
Moving away from solely that, yes. Kissinger says he and Nixon were focused on exploring where cooperation was possible based on shared interests, even with adversaries, reevaluating what truly served America.
And the opening to China is the absolute classic example of this realpolitik shift, isn't it? What were the immediate strategic benefits Kissinger saw?
Oh, absolutely classic. In less than 2 years, Nixon and Kissinger managed to create this de facto alliance with China against what they saw as the main threat, the Soviet Union.
How did that change the game?
It completely reshuffled the deck, as Kissinger puts it. Suddenly, the Soviets had to worry about serious challenges on two fronts: NATO in Europe and China in Asia.
Making them more cautious.
Exactly. It made any Soviet adventurism below the level of general war much riskier because it might just push the U.S. and China even closer together. That famous Sino-American rapprochement they dreaded, pure realpolitik, focused on the global power balance.
Fast forward towards the end of the Cold War. Kissinger attributes the Soviet collapse partly to overextension. What did he mean by that, and how did Gorbachev's reforms reflect this?
Basically, the Soviet Empire was built bloodily, as he says, through conquest and control, but maintaining that empire, competing militarily and ideologically with the West. It eventually just drained the system.
It became unsustainable.
Utterly. Gorbachev recognized the deep economic rot and knew they needed breathing room, so he initiated this major rethink of foreign policy.
A major.
Kissinger notes Gorbachev was the first Soviet leader to basically throw out the whole class struggle ideology, talking instead about coexistence as an end in itself for the good all humanity. His foreign minister, Shevardnadze, even publicly listed past Soviet mistakes like the war in Afghanistan and the crippling arms race.
A real moment of self-awareness.
A stunning moment driven by internal weakness and the need for change.
So, the Cold War ends. The Soviet Union dissolves. The U.S. is suddenly the sole superpower in a unipolar world.
Yeah.
How does Kissinger see the diplomatic landscape changing? What are the new challenges and opportunities for the U.S.?
With no single overriding threat anymore, Kissinger observes that nations are freer to pursue policies based more on their immediate national interest. We're back in a multipolar world, in a sense.
So order has to be built differently.
Yes. He argues order will have to emerge more like it did in past centuries through balancing and reconciling competing national interests. It's not automatic. He warns the U.S. as the only remaining superpower against trying to socially engineer other countries, like Russia. Instead, he advocates for frank talks about where interests align and where they diverge, and he brings up geography again. He reminds us, geopolitically, America is an island off the shores of the large landmass of Eurasia.
Meaning
Meaning that the old danger still applies. Preventing any single power from dominating either Europe or Asia remains a core strategic interest for America.
how does America do that now?
Kissinger argues it depends heavily on managing bilateral relations with the major countries of Asia, particularly Japan and China. The U.S. role is crucial, he thinks, in helping them coexist peacefully despite their own rivalries.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together from Richelieu to the post-Cold War era, what's Kissinger's final takeaway? What's the enduring challenge for American diplomacy?
His conclusion really tries to bridge that gap between American values and global realities. He says it's perfectly reasonable for the United States to try to buttress equilibrium with moral consensus, promote democracy globally.
There's a but.
There's a big but. He insists America dare not neglect the analysis of the balance of power because, he warns, that quest for moral consensus becomes self-defeating when it destroys the equilibrium.
So find the balance between the two.
Exactly. He even offers two models for how balance of power systems work. The British way, wait for a threat, then join the weaker side. Or Bismarck's way, actively prevent threats, build alliances, be moderate.
The core challenge is realism.
It's understanding that a stable world order has to accommodate different interests. You can try to shape them, align them with your values, but you can't just wish them away or assume everyone sees the world as you do.
Wow. This whole journey through Kissinger's diplomacy, it really does make you grapple with that constant dance between high-minded principles and, well, the often messy practicalities of international relations.
It absolutely does.
From Richelieu's cold calculations to Wilson's soaring, maybe sometimes naive visions, and then the intense strategic chess of the Cold War. You really see these historical patterns repeating, or at least rhyming.
The echoes are undeniable.
So, thinking about all this, what does it mean for us right now, today? Here's something provocative from Kissinger to mull over. In today's world where America constantly faces choices between its deeply held values and its strategic necessities, can you pinpoint a specific current global challenge where that tension, universal moral principles versus pragmatic balance of power is playing out most intensely?
That's the critical question.
And maybe, just maybe, understanding these different historical styles of diplomacy, the Richelieus, the Wilsons, the Bismarcks, the Kissingers, could help us figure out how to navigate it better.
I think the insights from diplomacy really drive home that every country, including the U.S., operates in this incredibly complex mix of its own values, its unique history, and the hard geopolitical facts on the ground.
It's never simple.
Never. The perennial challenge for leaders, then and now, is how to reconcile all those forces, how to make choices that don't just feel right morally, but actually work to build a stable, peaceful international order. It's a constant, delicate balancing act.
Powerful stuff indeed. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring the fascinating, complex world around you.